I've seen the situation where the CEO realized that he wasn't going to get the company to the next level. So he stepped out into his sort of innovator role, brought in a new CEO. They then worked together as sort of a visionary integrator type of relationship. And then 3 and a bit years later, when the CEO left, he then stepped back into the CEO role. But he'd had 3.5 years of watching someone else be the CEO, and he'd learned from that. He'd learned to the point where he'd now elevated his capabilities, elevated his competencies, so he could lead the new company as it was at that point in time. So it doesn't mean you're stepping out forever. Now, sometimes you might, but you don't have to. It could be just for now.
Or it just means, okay, you have to accelerate your learning journey,
Yep.
Can we say that here? Get a coach, right? Help you somebody to accelerate the growth, because so often the area of misalignment is not necessarily the whole role. It might be just a part that needs to be managed, and it might be just change in a mindset that needs to happen.
Welcome back to CardCast, the podcast where Milan and I chat through a card drawn at random from the deck of cards. A deck of cards just like this. So let's shuffle that deck and see what pops out today.
We have a club card. So club cards are about the mindset and inner game of the CEO, but obviously doesn't apply into CEO, but because who isn't a CEO? If nothing else, you're a CEO of your own life. So this really generally applies to everybody.
Now, this card's been written from the perspective of a founder. Reading through this a while back, I was thinking that this can apply to anyone at any stage in a company's growth cycle. It's more the situation of what do you do when you come to the realization, or it's brought to your attention, that maybe you're not the right person to get it to the next level. So talk to us about your thinking here.
Let me ask two things, right? It's like you're not the right person for the next step, whatever that is. And you might not be the right person for that yet. It just means that you need to grow into that role, right? It's about the misalignment of the needs and the capacity, right? Whether it's your maturity level, or whether it is your competency, that doesn't matter. It just means basically that you're not up for whatever the next challenge is. And the reason why it started from the founder point of view is because for a founder, it's actually a much harder decision, or it's much harder realization, because, hey, this is my company, I should be able to do that. And they do have tendency to live in a denial, sometimes for way too long. The advantage of the non-founder is that they usually have somebody to tell them, right? Or there is that feedback loop. There is hopefully some kind of accountability mechanism that starts raising the flags and say, hey, maybe not everything is golden in here. But founder will have the tendency more often than not to suffer from a little bit of a tunnel vision, and from, hey, I should be able to do this syndrome, without realizing, hey, maybe I am not the right one for this company anymore. And the trigger is generally that it really stops being fun for them to do what they're doing. That's the best signal is just to go to your gut and figure that out.
What happens when the founder or the CEO doesn't see that?
It's a very, very good question. It will show as absolutely massive slew of disjointed and seemingly independent signals from the organization, right? You will start seeing turnover employees. You will start seeing the company plateauing. Maybe the sales are not there. You will have a higher mishire rate, right? So many little things just start going wrong, and it's very, very simple, because the CEO does not anymore, whether they see it or not, they do not have the capacity to hold it all together.
Yeah. But it was a bit of a leading question because I have a experience of this situation directly myself. A few years ago, I was asked by a board to spend some time with the CEO of a company that was going through exactly the symptoms you've outlined. And the CEO didn't want to meet with me. He kept on cancelling meetings. It was probably about 3 or 4 months after the board had asked him to meet with me that we actually finally got to meet. And he was very defensive. He wasn't prepared to sort of share any information. And it was clear to me that the call was going nowhere. So the question I put to him is, do you know why the board has asked us to meet? And he looked at me and without a hint of irony said, I have no idea. Uh, so I said, well, maybe you should go and ask them.
Yes. Maybe,
And
yeah.
do you think he did? No,
Uh,
he didn't. And within the month, he was gone.
yeah.
Because he wasn't reading the signals that the board was clearly giving him. He wasn't taking up the opportunity that the board had given him to speak to someone to maybe get a different perspective, or maybe get some help, or maybe help him see what he was not able to see himself. So he was given the opportunity of having a blind spot remover, and he didn't take the opportunity.
Mm-hmm. That was even bigger blind spot then. you know, he had big enough blind spot to cover the fact that he had blind spots.
Well, I mean, his blind spots ended up in him getting blindsided.
Yeah. Okay. Um, what I usually see is that I would talk to a founder CEO and they would just be tired, right? They would just be done or they would be desperate in some way. And really the core of the situation is that they got to where they are on a sheer will and talent and their natural abilities. But it takes you only so far in any organization growth. And either at that point you decide, all right, this is okay, meaning I want a lifestyle company that is going to take this, and this is how we're going to go, and that's fine. And I will never, ever, ever criticize somebody for doing that because again, the company is there to serve their life, not the other way around. But putting that aside, if they want the company to grow, if the ambition is there to take it somewhere, if their BHAG is, still pretty far out, then really it comes to those two decisions, right? Either, okay, I have to now stop being just the founder. I need to really transform myself into a leader. Or I will need to find a leader to do that for me. And therefore I need to leave. And leave doesn't mean necessarily to leave the company. It just means to leave that particular position, right? I've seen that, people would go to non-executive roles on the board. People would go to, hey, I'm just really good at the technical stuff. And so I'll stay the CTO or, whatever that is, assuming obviously that they're the right fit for that position. Because I've seen even that happening when people would create a position for themselves that they also were not the best fit for. That is also dangerous. So some blind spot remover and somebody, having a conversation with and figuring out what that path is for that organization and for that leader or for that founder is quite critical because again, the blind spots are part of the game here, and you know tunnel vision is definitely a massively common symptom.
So there's the realization that maybe they're not the right person to get it to the next level. So the choice then is, okay, I can bring someone in and I can then either leave the role or leave the company. Either of those are options. Uh, but you mentioned earlier on, sometimes it's a fact that they're not ready yet. And I've seen the situation where the CEO realized that he wasn't going to get the company to the next level. So he stepped out into his sort of innovator role, brought in a new CEO. They then worked together as sort of, a visionary integrator type of relationship. And then 3 and a bit years later, about 3.5 years later, when the CEO left, he then stepped back into the CEO role. But he'd had 3.5 years of watching someone else be the CEO, and he'd learned from that. He'd learned to the point where he'd now elevated his capabilities, elevated his competencies, so he could lead the new company as it was at that point in time. So it doesn't mean you're stepping out forever. Now, sometimes you might, but you don't have to. It could be just for now.
Or it just means, okay, you have to accelerate your learning journey,
Yep.
can we say that here? Get a coach, right?
Mm-hmm.
Help you somebody to accelerate the growth, because, so often the area of misalignment is not necessarily the whole role. It might be just a part that needs to be managed, and it might be just change in a mindset that needs to happen. And sometimes I see turnarounds like that done within a quarter, right? Because it's literally just about realization. Okay, this is how we need to go about it. And, quite often what you just mentioned, meaning finding the integrator, right? Because I would argue that most founder CEOs are probably a little farther on the visionary scale, because if they weren't, they would not have the idea to, to get things going in the first place. They have to have some kind of vision. So very often this type of emotional burnout with the business that we see as a flag is the part that they just really need somebody to complement them, right? We talked about in the time audit episode, we were talking about, the things that give you joy and drain our energy. And, we all know that burnout is not necessarily there because of too much work, is there because of there is too much of the wrong work. So quite often it's about redistribution of accountabilities. It's about teaching them, or learning from the leader's perspective, to actually rely on their team better. Stop being the bottleneck in the organization. Having or building a leadership team that will execute even when they're not there, and so on and so on. All of those things that we talk about in different episodes and write in different cards. The mix is different for everybody, but if they want to say, okay, I want to actually stay, I want to see this through, and as a decision point, means that, hey, that means that you will need to change your behavior, right? And
It's about,
and
it's about
that is
having the
that
self-awareness.
exactly. So, and that's where we come in, right? We'll help them, and we'll coach in that behavior change, because it's all what we're doing, right? We want to get rid of some habits, we want to install new ones, and we need to change the way we act so we get a different results. Simple.